Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our eighth lecture in our MSc program for file safety management. And today we will have a discussion on file safety management in other developed countries. So as we moved beyond our Hong Kong's context, we will have examine how are the different nations of their file safety codes or other regulations. And let's begin by understand why this topic matters, especially for those of you who may work in some global standards. Okay, so to provide a clear roadmap of your extension session today, this lecture is systematically structured to cover fire safety legislation across 7 key jurisdictions, offering very good methodology comparisons. So we will begin by establishing a fundamental understanding of the common features of international fire safety legislation. So from this broad perspective, we will then step deep into the specific system of the United States and also Canada. And then we will across the Atlantic to explore the United Kingdom's approach. And our journey will end to take the analysis of Australia's system and also the examination of in Japan and Sweden. So each country presents fascinating cases in balance safety requirement with practical implementation, and also reflecting their individual legal traditions and society priorities. So we will pay close attention to the movement from the prescriptive to performance-based regulations, and it is a trend to reshaping our profession. Okay, so when we take a step back and examine the fire safety legislation on a global scale, one of the most important and the first observation is that the significant variation from one country to another. So there is no single and universal model. Historically, much of the legislation has primarily concerned with new buildings, focusing on the setting standard at the construction phase rather than regulating the vast stock of the existing structures. So it should be noted that the emphasis has been more on the installation and the maintenance of the specific fire safety system and equipment, like the sprinklers and the alarm system, rather than on some prescribing the comprehensive fire safety management alone. So this creates an interesting and complex challenge for the professionals working across international boundaries, where a solution perfectly acceptable in one country might not comply in another. Okay, so despite the difference we have just mentioned, a very close analysis revealed that several common features run through the most international fire safety framework. So the first one is that the legislation typically applied more to workplace and public buildings rather than to the private homes. This reflecting a greater concentration of the risk and the public responsibility. So the primary focus is definitely on life safety, that is, ensuring the survival and the safe egress of the occupants, rather than on the protection of the building structure or its contents. So this is often its beneficial secondary effect. So building standards for the safety of the firefighters and for prevention of the spread of the fire to the adjacent area is also their consideration. And importantly, most country and the states operate a two different system, treating the new buildings and the existing buildings differently, somehow under their legal framework because of the practical and the economic challenge of ensuring safety features into the old structure. Okay, so let's pay attention first to the United States. We find that a system that is both highly advanced and complex. So, unlike many nations with a centralized code, most US states, countries, and cities have independently developed their own building regulations with the principal goal of ensuring public safety. So, these building codes represent comprehensively set of rules to ensure that the structure are not only structurally sound, but also fire resistant and generally safe for their occupants over the building's entire life cycles. So the development of these codes has been a dynamic process in order to address increasingly complex safety challenge presented by new architectural models, materials, and the building forms used through the regulatory framework. So let's give a simple example to illustrate this point. So imagine you are designing a new modern office building, and the key feature of your design is a very impressive open concept atrium that connects all the floors, in which you plan to leave the unsprinklered to showcase its architecture beauty. So you use very special and fire-resistant glass and advanced calculation method to prove that the design is safety. So now let's have a look at what will happen when you submit the same design into the two different states. So if you submit your design to Nevada, so your design might be perfectly equal. The IBC, that is the International Building Codes, allowed for atriums to be without sprinkler under specific condition, such as if every floor around the atrium is equipped with a full ventilation system. So your engineering analysis is successful demonstrated that your design is compliance with the code. But if you submit your design to California, so your submission, the exact same design. However, the authorities would likely reject it. Why they reject your design? Because in California, the Californian codes have a blanket rules that state all atrium must be protected by an automatic sprinkler system. So with no exception for engineering analysis in such particular case. So the sophistication of the modern US fire codes reflects an ongoing and necessary adaptation to a changing world. So they continuously integrate knowledge about the new materials, innovative fire protection techniques, and the evolving method for protecting a diverse public. So interestingly, the function of this code has expanded beyond their primary fire safety instruction to serve broader society goals. So it is now common for building and fire codes to include provision that promote the accessibility for disabled person and to incorporate energy conservation measures. So this expansion demonstrates that how fire safety code or regulations can act as a powerful driver for positive social change and sustainably far beyond their immediate purpose of the life safety. Okay, in order to truly understand the US system, we must capture its defining characteristic, that is the significant regulatory fragmentation. There is no single national code, no single national fire code. Instead, they are multiple overlapping sources of the regulation and the numerous pathways for the publicity of the standards. So if we consider the foundation structure, in US, we have 50 states, and each state has its own constitution and legal system. And within this constitution and the legal system, the state can delegate the authority for the fire safety regulation further down to the local communities. So this creates a very complex and multi-layered patchwork of requirement. So for the people designing buildings, this means that the rules can change literally from their own towns to the next towns. So what's fine in one city might be illegal in the next city. So that is a big problem. So this presents particular difficulties for design professionals and the corporations working across multiple jurisdiction boundaries. So the list system is fundamentally self-regulatory in nature, meaning that the primary responsibility for most public health, safety, and welfare regulation fails to state government, which in turn often delegated to local and regional jurisdiction. So what does it will be? This will create both valuable flexibility and considerable complexity in implementation, requiring a highly specialized understanding of local laws for successful project delivery. For example, a national retail chain must ensure that each of its stores complied with the specific fire code of that city or countries. So in the specific context of the United States system, it is crucial to understand an important distinction between codes and the standards, which the specific meaning are shown here. A code is fundamentally a legal document that sets down minimum requirements to protect public health, safety, and general welfare. So the code itself has the force of law once adopted, and a jurisdiction may choose to write its own codes from time-consuming process, as evidenced by the around 1.6 million spent in 1968 to write the New York City Building Code. However, it is far more common for a jurisdiction to incorporate a model code into its legal requirement. So these model codes are developed by various organizations to be suitable for adoption by a wide variety of legislative authorities, providing a ready-made and consensus-based solution. So here we have a very important concept that is consensus-based. And we will have details for this concept. And the standard, in contrast, differ from the code in that they are typically narrow in scope. So for the standard, they provide a rule for an orderly approach to a specific activities, often addressing a particular topic, such as the standardized method of testing or for the detailed component specification. So you can think of a standard for a performance of a fire door or the installation procedure for a specific type of the sprinkler head. So like model code, they are written for the general use but are not mandatory in themselves. They only become legally enforceable once they are written into a law or by adopted by a local regulatory authorities. So in practice, the codes usually incorporate even hundreds of these specialized standards, creating a very complex hierarchy where the standards provide the technical details that support the broader legal objective of the codes. So that is the main difference between the codes and the standard. So the development of these influential model codes is not a top-down process. So it relies fundamentally on consensus building among a wide range of interested parties to achieve broader acceptance. So this process requires common agreement among the stakeholders, including engineers, architects, firefighters, and the manufacturers, on what the constitutes approach, design, and implementation for a specific fire safety element. So the consensus standards, as we mentioned before, are developed under the procedures that generally meet the strict criteria to ensure that the due process and to avoid any restraint of the trade. So this inclusive process is designed to create robust standards that balance the various stakeholders' interests while maintaining the scientific-based safety requirement. So they will leading to a more widely supported and effective regulations. So it is important to recognize that the term consensus can represent varying degree of agreement depending on which parties are represented and have voting rights in the standardization process. So some standards are developed with near universal participation from all affected sectors, leading to a strong consensus. So others may be developed by a more limited group. So this variation ultimates the acceptabilities of the resulting standard within the broader professional community. So a standard developed without input from a file service or material scientist might face challenge and be adopted less widely, potentially creating the gaps in safety or conflicting requirements in this field. So the key concept in this slide is the various degree of consensus. We don't have only one layer degree of the consensus, but we have several various or limit group to establish this kind of consensus for in the voting rights and in the standardization process. Okay, so the central organization in the United States system is what? It's like American National Standard Institute. So this institute acts as the crucial coordination and the facilitator, serving as the volunteer federation of over 400 United States organizations. So it is a kind of voluntary federations. So its primary roles are to write and coordinate national consensus standards. Crucially, only standards that meet ANSI's criteria for open process, balance, and the due process are accepted as American national standard. So in this part, we have such as we have one standard from a local state or for a very limited group. But if they want to become an American national standard, they must meet the criteria of the ANSI. So it is vital to understand that ANSI is not itself a standard writing organization. Every standard bearing the ANSI designation was originally written by another organization and then submitted to ANSI for review and adoption. And ANSI is the single official that United States representative to the what? International Organization for Standards. That is, we know that ISO. So that means for a United States standard to become an international standard, it must firstly be accepted by ANSI. So ANSI is very powerful, right? So this brings us to a potential obstacle, the limited consensus code and the standard. So these are prevalent when decisions are made by a non-representative group, such as a solo building officials or members of the particular industry without adequate input from other critical stakeholders. So the subject of United States model building codes has at that time become a contentious issue because so many important voices, such as members of the fire service, consumer advocates, or specific engineering disciplines, has been exclusive from the voting body. As we mentioned before, the voting rights is very important in the standard due process. So if this kind of group are excluded from the voting body, that their voice may not be heard for our process of the standard building. So this highlights that the critical importance of inclusive, transparent, and balanced standardization process to ensure that the resulting codes are not only technically sound, but also practical and follow the widespread and the compliance from all parties who must use them. Okay, so the scale of the United States regulatory landscape is truly vast. So from the work in 1984, it was identified that there were at least 40,000 different regulatory building codes across the nation. So while three principal building code groups have brought a degree of order and uniformity within their respective area, the ultimate responsibility of building and the fire codes still rests with the local government at the city, country, or state level. So this local government retain the freedom to either develop their own unique codes or they can adopt a published model codes. So this kind of adoption with amendment approach means that even when using a model code, the local variation are still persist, right? Because they have their own rights to develop and to modify and even also adopt a published model codes. So for a traditional and important distinction, it is exists between the building codes and the fire codes in terms of their content, enforcing authorities, and the periods of applications. So typically, the local building department is responsibility for the initial phase. So what's their duty? So they review the construction plans to ensure that a new building meets the requirement of the building codes. And they inspect the completely structure for compliance before issuing an occupation permit. So once that occupation permit has been issued, the building department's directly responsibility largely ends. And then at this point, the fire codes become the primary applicable regulations and remain in force for the entire life of the building. So enforcement then typically shift to the fire department of a fire marshal who conduct the priority inspection to ensure that the ongoing compliance of the building to the fire codes. So now we mentioned about the fire marshal. So what does it mean? The key figure in this ongoing enforcement is the fire marshal. The fire marshal acts as a chief fire prevention officer within a state. So in state that have adopted a statewide fire code, you will typically find an office of the fire marshal within the state's governmental organization. So the fire marshal's duties are extensive. They are often charged not only with enforcement, but also with the critical responsibility of the fire investigation to determine original and the causes. So in the most jurisdiction, it is the fire marshal or an equivalent official who has the ongoing responsibility to maintain the fire safety in existing buildings that occupied by the public, to ensuring that the fire alarms, sprinklers, and other fire safety systems are properly maintained throughout the building's life. So to help coordinate this decentralized system, the National Association of State Fire Marshal was formed in 1989. So this organization serves to represent its members who are the most senior fire officials from each state and their staff. So through such a collective body, the common and the uniform communications could be established effectively through every state. So this organization provides a common forum for the problem solving, collaborative research, and other professional development. So perhaps most importantly, it gave this diverse group the ability to speak as a unique body in the national policy arena with one powerful voice, avoiding that for a kind of improved fire safety legislation and standard at a national level. So they will run from their state level and they come to the national level by using this kind of organization. Okay, now let's come to our most important part in this class. That is the National Fire Protection Association. So National Fire Protection Association is a non-profit organization with a massive and diverse membership of approximately 68,000 individuals. So this membership represents an incredible broad range of the interests, including some practical anyone with a stake in fire safety, such as engineers, architects, firefighters, insurers, builders, and the facility managers. So about 10% of its membership is international, representing over 70 countries, which speaks to its global influence. So the basic technical activity of NFPA involve the development, publication, and the dissemination of the current consensus standard through a well-defined and inclusive process. So you may ask, will the NFPA write the codes itself? So you can think about it. Because we mentioned it involves the development and the publication. So does this organization write the code by itself? So you can think of these questions and let's look at in today's digital age. In today's digital age, NFPA has made significant steps in ensuring its library of information is accessible. So it provides extensive digital resource, most notably through its National Fire Codes subscription. So this online database is a powerful tool designed for professionals who play an important leading role in implementing and enforcing codes. So it provides convenient access to the entire library of NFPA codes and the standards, helping users to keep the most up-to-date information literally at their fingerprints. So NFPA maintains a very extensive profile of more than 291 technical documents developed by 211 technical committees comprising over more than 5,000 volunteer individuals. So it should be noted that it's volunteer individuals. So that will answer the question, does the NFPA write the code by itself? No, the code is written by volunteer individuals. So it is the publisher of the Fire Protection Handbook and the Comprehensive National Fire Codes. So while our life safety code, NFPA 101, is the most famous publication, some of the other widely used and critical standards include such as NFPA 1, NFPA 13, and NFPA 30, that is for the installation of the sprinkler system and for the flammable and the combustible liquid codes. So this kind of codes will address a storage and handling a kind of very vast variety of the codes and cover every corner of our fire safety itself. Okay, so this is another essential standards and specialized documents list here. You can take a photo for these pictures. Okay, so let's come to our first question. That is a single question. So what is the primary function of the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA? So you have 2 minutes to think of these questions and you can give an answer. That is a single choice question. Okay, this question is very easy, and let's take a look at this question. So the choice A, to enforce fire codes at the federal level in the United States. B, to manufacture and sell fire safety equipment globally. And C, to develop, publish, and disseminate consensus standard on fire safety. D, to provide emergency response service to local fire department. So which one do you think is correct? So any volunteers to answer this question? Just give your answer. And no matter if your answer are correct or not, just give your answers. So this is a very simple question, and it is one choice, very simple questions. So which one do you think is the correct answer? Any volunteers? No? So I will ask the student to answer the question. Okay, so which one do you think is the correct answer to this question? You think A is the correct answer, right? To enforce fire code at the federal level in the United States. So it is a little bit confused. I think the correct answer is C. As we talked before, the primary function of the National Fire Protection Association. So the primary function is to develop, publish, and disseminate the consensus standards on fire safety. And for A, it is for their high-level functions, but not their primary functions. Okay, so the right answer is C, to develop, publish, and disseminate the consensus standard on fire safety. And please keep this answer in mind, and they will appear in your final examination. Okay, so these detailed codes and standards gain their legal force through the specific enforcement mechanism. The fire safety regulations are primarily enforced through the power of the building permits, which allow the construction to begin only if the plans comply. So the licensing authority, which ensure the qualified individuals to do the work, and the ongoing inspection, which verify compliance in the field. So in most United States jurisdiction, there is a clear division of labor. The building department administers the building codes, focusing on the initial construction and the alteration of the structure. And conversely, the fire department or the fire marshal's office is typically responsible for ensuring ongoing compliance with the fire code throughout the building's operational life. So conducting a regular inspection of the facilities like schools, hospitals, and high-rise buildings. So there is a very extremely distinction from the building department and the fire department. So this the process by which the NFPA develops and updates its standard. So it is a rigorous and built on consensus. So we can take a look at this process. This process begins with the submission of the proposal from the public or committee members. And then these proposals are reviewed by a balanced technical committees, which then produce a report on proposal. The report or proposal that is made available for the public comment. That is a critical stage where any interested parties can provide the common input for the reporter. Then the committee will review all the public comments and issues a report on comments, that is ROC. And the proposed standard is then voted on at the NFPA Association meeting. So finally, the standard council oversees the entire process to ensure the due process was followed before ensuring a new or revised standard. So let's take an example. Imagine there is a few years from now, a new type of fast charging battery for electric scooter becomes very popular, right? So we start seeing that the fire occurring when these scooters are charged in apartment building corridors, and they block the escape routes. So how the NFPA process to address this new hazard? So for the first step, a fire marshal from a major city who has witnessed such incident, and he submits a formal proposal to the relevant NFPA technical committee. So the proposal suggests adding a new clause that the charging of personnel mobility device in common corridor and exit enclosures will be prohibited. So it's not correct. Let's see what will happen. So the committee made up of engineers, firefighters, and building managers will debate it. So they might agree with the intent, but they will suggest a more precise wording. So they publish their initial recommendation in the report of the proposal. So now the public gets involved. The report of the proposal, that is ROP, is published for everyone to see. So the scooter manufacturer might file a public comments arguing that a blanket ban is too broad and that the safe charging station should be allowed. And a national tenants union might comment another one in a strong support of this ban. And the fire safety engineers might submit data on the heat release rate of this battery. So the committee review all these comments in the report on comments, that is ROC. So they might revise the language based on the feedback, perhaps changing the ban to allow for approved charging rooms or outlets. So the revised language is then debated and voted on the member of the NFPA association meeting. And if the vote passes, the Standard Council will give the final approval. So the next edition of NFPA 1 will then include this new consensus-based requirement. So you see, a new fire safety rule is scientific process involving the proposal, the expert committees, the public input, and the formal voting. All of them designed to produce the safety possible outcome based on the best available information. So the NFPA Life Safety Code, or NFPA 101, is the most widely used and influential guides to the life safety from fire in buildings in the United States. So its origins are rooted in the treaty directly from 1918 factory codes, which itself was a response to the Triangle Sheetwash factory fire of 1911, which killed 100 garment workers, primarily the young women. So this initial focus on exists quickly expanded. A department store exit code was published shortly after it, and followed by a school exit code. So these early focused documents eventually work together into the comprehensive life safety code. That is what we know now today, NFPA 101. So a defining characteristic of the life safety code is that it deals with the existing buildings in details. So it is thoughtfully divided into separate chapters for both new buildings and existing structures of various occupancy type. So this is critical important because the fire safety challenge in an old existing building can be very different from those in a new and innovative buildings. So the United States federal government mandates mandates the compliance with the life safety code for all health care that treat the Medicare patients precisely because of the code's comprehensive and practical coverage of the existing buildings that ensure a baseline of the safety for more of vulnerable populations. So a major revolution in our fire safety code was the introduction of the formal performance-based opinion in its 2000 edition. So this represents a significant philosophy shift. In this approach, fundamentally life safety objectives of the code are first translated into several specific objectives of the code. So rather than following a prescriptive checklist, the designer can use the file model and other advanced computational method. So these tools are used in the combination with the specific building design and a set of credible file scenarios and also the explicit engineering assumptions. So to calculate and demonstrate whether the performance criteria are met is the most important part for the performance-based options. So if the analysis prove that the criteria are satisfied, then compliance with the code under this performance-based design is achieved, allowing for an innovative design solutions. So the influence of the NFPA 101 is visually demonstrated by its widespread adoption across the United States. As this map shows us, many states indicated in the blue have adopted the life safety code on a statewide basis. So this level of adoption underscores the code status as a national adoption. So it is a kind of national benchmark for the life safety and provide a significant degree of uniformity across the United States. So for you, as the future professionals, you should understand that the provision of NFPA 101 is very essential, as it will likely be a key compliance document for a wide range of projects you will encounter. So before the consolidation of United States model codes, three principal regional organizations plays a very critical roles in issuing model codes and the standard. So the first was the International Conference of Building Officials. This organization was unique because it was owned and controlled by its member cities, countries, and states, which tend to be heavily concentrated in the western United States. So the ICBO was responsible for publishing and maintaining two critical documents. The first one is the Uniform Building Code, and the second one is the Uniform Fire Codes. So these codes form the regulation foundation for construction and fire safety across much of the western United States for decades. But for the Southeast United States, the dominant organization was the Southern Building Code Congress International. We call it SBCCI. So this organization also functioned as a professional society for building officials and the code administrators. A major aims of the SBCCI was to develop the basic code provisions that were specifically appropriate for the distinct climate and the building traditions of the southeast states. So consider like the hurricane resilience and the high humidity. So its membership was also largely drawn from the southeastern states. So the SBCCI published its own set of the model document, the standard building code and the standard the fire codes, which are tailored to the needs of its region and were widely adopted anywhere. So the last regional codes group was the Building Official and the Code Administrator International, or BOCA. So the BOCA operates as a service organization dedicated to professional code administration and enforcement. So its active membership was open to governmental units involved in formulating or enforcing construction, fire safety, and land use regulations. So its influence was most heavily concentrated in the northeastern and the midwestern states. To serve this vast region, BOCA published and maintained the National Building Code and the National Fire Codes. It is important not to confuse this with the Canadian codes of the same name. This was distinctly document that addressed the specific regulatory needs for the colder and the more densely populated Northeast and the Midwest states. Now let's come to the most important body, that is the International Code Council. The International Code Council was established in 1994, and the ICC was created as a non-profit organization with a clear and ambitious mission. So what will be its mission? It aims to develop a single set of clear and comprehensive national construction code. So it is a construction code for the national wild. So up to this point, the technical disparities among the three model codes had made it difficult for building industry professionals to operate in more than one region. And the ICC intention was to offer a single, complete set of construction codes without regional variations. So a major milestone was reached in the year 2000 when the ICC published the first edition of the International Building Codes, IBC, and the International Fire Codes, IFC. So the philosophy of ICC is maintaining an open and participatory process for the code development. Any interested individual of group, whether an engineer, a builder, or a member of the public, may submit a manuscript that is a formal code change proposal for consideration by the ICC's Code Development Committee. So once the proposal is received, these proposals are first checked for the completeness, and the accepted or administrative corrective proposal are then published and make available to the entire membership for their review. So this concurrent insurance, the potential change are checked by a wide audience of expertise and the stakeholders long before they are voted on. So the ICC process also include a formal mechanism for challenging the recommendation of the code develop committees. So all interested parties are invited to file such a challenge, which are also published before consideration. So this challenge provides an opportunity to the interested party to testify and to present their cases at the public hearing held during the ICC annual conference. And the final action on all challenge code change proposal is then based on a vote by the eligible voting member, primarily the governmental building and the fire officials, and then present at this annual conference. So this body adopt the proposed change as part of the code or they reject them. So these final actions are then incorporated into the next supplement or addition of the code, ensuring the code remain dynamic and responsive to a new technology. Okay, so here comes to our second question. So what was the primary goal of forming the ICC? And you have 2 minutes to look at this question. It is also a single choice questions. You can also take a picture and feed to DeepSeek. He will give you correct answer, but you need to understand why. So it is very simple, and let's look at the question together. What was the primary goal of forming the ICC? To compete directly with the NFPA and reduce its membership. To develop a single set of comprehensive national construction codes. To take over the fire code enforcement responsibility from local governments and to focus exclusively on writing products testing standard for manufacturers. So which one do you think is the correct answer? Okay, so the correct answer is B. To develop a single set of comprehensive national construction codes. So, according to our previous slides, the ICC was established to consolidate the three original model codes group and create a single set of national codes without regional variations. So, such as the international building codes and the international fire codes. This was done to bring the uniformity and reduce difficulties for professionals working across different United States regions. So you need to understand that the primary goal of forming the ICC is to form a uniformity and to reduce the difficulty for professionals. Okay, and let's take a break for 10 minutes. And after that, we will see some other part for the United States codes. Okay, now let's continue our class. Okay, so in this class, let's firstly look at some product standards and the testing. That is for the United States organizer, ASTM. So ASTM is formerly known as the American Society for Testing and the Materials. So ASTM is a developer and a publisher for technical information designed to ensure the quality of commodities and the quality of the service and the safety of the products. So it includes approximately 26,000 members organized into numerous technical committees. So half of these committees are dedicated to developing standardized tests for given phenomenon, like how a material behaves in fire, while the other half focus on developing the detailed performance and the specification standards for a given class of produce, from the steel beams to the fire-resistant glasses. So this ASTM committee maintained an impressive library of over 5,000 individual standards. So the key feature of their process is balance. The committee membership is carefully structured by requiring the number of industrial members must always be less than the number of general interest and the consumer member, which will prevent any single interest group from dominating the process. And for the professional practice of the fire safety engineering, the Society of the Fire Protection Engineers, SFPE, is the central professional organization. So it was organized in 1950s to serve professionals engaged in the specialized field of the fire protection and the fire safety engineer. So here we propose its purpose, and it has a chapter in the Australia, Canada, Europe, and the United States. Okay, so it is also important to recognize the other major United States engineering society produce the standards that serve directly or indirectly to the fire safety evaluations. So we have the ASCE, ASME, and the ASHE. So this network of the specialized standard creates a comprehensive web of the safety knowledge. Okay, now let's come to the insurance industry. The insurance organization has played a fundamental and often overlooked role in the development of the fire safety standard in the United States. The National Board of the Fire Underwrites, NBFU, for instance, actually developed the first U.S. model building code and originates many of the fire safety standards that now fall within the scope of the NFPA. So the industry, comprised of hundreds of individual companies and associations, maintains a strong and active presence in the area of requirements for property protections. So Factory Mutual is a scientific research and testing organization managed by FM Global, which resulted from the merge of insurance companies from the former Factory Mutual system. So its research focused intensely on fire loss phenomenon, fire loss control methodologies, and the risk engineering. So the research into the real-world industry hazard combined with the extensive test data is used to develop the highly detailed and practical protection guidelines. So these guidelines cover a comprehensive list of the property loss prevention topics and are widely respected and used by industry with the higher hazard operation to protect their facility far beyond the minimum of the building code. So this property conservation standard, developed by the Factory Mutual Research, are accepted by a wide variety of jurisdictions due to their research-based foundation. So beyond the setting standard, FMR also maintains a third-party product the certification service. So the loss prevention products and the materials, from the sprinkler to the fire-resistant coating, are tested and must be approved for listing by FMR before they are recognized within its protection guidance. So we know that this FM approval mark is a highly trusted symbol in the industry fire protection. So the Insurance Service Office, or ISO, operates in a different but equally important roles. So insurance in the United States is regulated by individual states, and the ISO functions according to state laws as several key entities. It acts as an insurance rating organization, an insurance actuarial service, and advisory organizations. So crucially, the ISO prepares insurance rating schedules with the state government. So these schedules help set the insurance premiums. So furthermore, ISO administers the fire suppression rating schedule, which is the document used to evaluate and classify the capacity of over 2,400 fire departments in the United States. So now let's come to our questions. Which organization is known for its scientific research, testing, and the FM-approved product certification mark in the field of the property loss prevention? We mentioned before for the property loss prevention. So I think it's very easy because it is the factory material research. We mentioned about the research and the testings, and it is highly related to the FMR field of its function. Okay, so let's look at several fire safety in the United States, and the first one is the workplace fire safety. So the workspace fire safety is highly related to the function of the Department of Labor, Occupational Safety, and Health Administration, as we know as the OSHA. So the OSHA has the major task of developing and enforcing the standards to protect the health and the safety in place of the work. So we highlight the workplace. That means we will highlight the responsibility of the work holders, and we care about the workers' safety in the fire. And the OSHA has issued its own standards, such as the standard for the management of the process hazard of highly hazardous chemicals. So these standards requires a comprehensive program to prevent or reduce the risk of the major industry incidents that might expose employees to the hazard of the toxic fire. And also, we have the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission established in 1972, and the aim of this CPSC is to protect the public against the unreasonable risk of injury from the consumer product. So the CPSC assists consumers in evaluating the comparative safety of the products, develop the uniform safety standard to minimize the conflicting states and the local regulations. So it plays a very important role in ensuring that the products we use in our daily life, from children's toys to the furnitures, do not pose an undue fire hazard. And this is also some primary responsibility for the CPSC. And we also consider the fire safety for transportation. The Department of the Transportation, DOT, established the National Transportation Policy with fire safety as the key component. Several DOT sub-agencies are involved with the regulatory action related to the fire safety. And we have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, for instance, which carries out the programs related to the safe performance of the motor vehicles. And this kind of motor vehicles, including such as the specific flammability regulations for some interior materials. And they also undertaken the extensive investigation of the major fire involved the motor vehicle to inform the future regulations. And the other transportation modes have their own specific regulations, such as the Federal Aviation Administration, which holds the responsibility for such as the fire safety and has detailed regulation for the control of the flammability of the combustible material used in the aircraft interiors. So the FAA is also deeply concerned with the crashworthiness. The crashworthiness is the ability of an aircraft structure to protect the occupants during a crash. So FAA also concerned with the prevention and the control of any ensuring pro-crash fire. And meanwhile, the fire hazard on vessel, from the commercial ship to the recreation boats, are also within the scope of the Coast Guards, which is another transportation safety in the United States. Also, beyond the traditional regulations, several United States federal entities engaged in the vital non-regulatory activities, such as the FEMA, which is created in 1979, was designed to provide a single point of accountability for all federal, state, and local level in preparing for their own codes and the standards. And also, its mission covers preparing and responding to the full range of the emergencies. So now we highlight emergencies such as the natural disaster and the man-made incidents and some nuclear events. So this includes hazard mitigation to reduce the long-term risk, coordinating relief operations, and providing recovery assistance. So FEMA's National Emergency Training Center maintains an extensive collection of reference on the emergency management. So within FEMA structure, there are two units are unique concern with the fire safety. The first one is the United States Fire Administration, and the other one is the National Fire Academy. So the National Fire Academy is the national premier institution for the fire service education, and the NFA conducts the residence and the outreach training courses for the fire service personnel and develop plenty of the training and the industrial material for our person and for our firefighters. And this is another United States organization, the National Institute of the Standard and the Technology, we know as the NIST, which plays a unique and indirect roles. So unlike the organizations we have discussed, the NIST does not develop the mandatory fire safety standard itself. Instead, it contributes to the technical foundation upon which those standards are built. So it is for the technical support. A major component of the NIST serves as the important point of the fundamental and applied fire research in the United States. So it includes a multidisciplinary technical staff supported by the world-class testing laboratories and an advanced research library conducting several science that help standard committee make some evidence-based and informed decision. So let's make an example. When we consider a type of the fire-resistant glass as an example, a manufacturer claims that it is safe and for our use in the office building stairwells. So the code committee need to know, does it actually work? And this is where NIST provide the essential proof. Their scientists would test the glass in their furnace and publish a report with several definitive data, answering that this glass can provide 45 minutes of fire resistance and there is the performance data. So NIST does not write the code, but by providing this independent scientific evidence, they give the code committee the confidence to say that the data check it, and we can now approve this class in the next edition of the building codes. Okay, so in summary, the United States system is characterized by a fundamental division of labor. So the federal government does not draft or enforce building and the fire regulations at the state or local level. Instead, several private and non-profit organizations, most notable the International Code Council, ICC, and the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, take the lead in drafting these comprehensive codes and the standards. So these model documents are then made available for volunteer adoption by states and the local government. And historically, the major building and fire codes used across the United States were a variation of one of the three regional mode codes: the Uniform Building Codes from ICBO, the Standing Building Codes, and the National Building Codes. So you can take a picture of these slides. And the three organizations that developed these codes made a landmark decision to merge their effort under the newly creation entity called the ICC. So this consolidation was formally completed in 2003. And we also have a parallel development like the NFPA and the Building Construction Safety Code, and creating a competing unified set of the model codes. So both of the major codes body, ICC and the NFPA, have actively pursued the development of our performance-based codes. Also, and they have taken different approach to achieve this. ICC has published a standalone comprehensive performance code called the ICC Performance Code for Building and Facilities. But NFPA has chosen to incorporate a performance option directly into its flagship building codes like NFPA 5000. So it is crucial to understand that in both approach, the traditional prescriptive documents will continue to be supported and remain the primary compliance path for the majority of the project, as they provide a very clear and well understand objectives for our method to achieve the safety. Okay, so the specificity of the NFPA work is evident in its extensive publication catalog, and this includes the updated standard like NFPA 13 and several other standards developed by NFPA. So now let's look at this question. What is the fundamental characteristic of how building and fire regulations are created and enforced in the United States? So you can look at this question and think about it. Okay, so which one do you think is the correct answer? The federal government writes and enforces a single national building code. The state governments completely control the process without any local input. The private organizations develop model codes that are adopted by state and the local governments. The international standards from ISO are directly implemented as United States law. So which one do you think is correct answer? Just give your answer and you don't need to care about whether it's correct or not. Just give your answer. Any volunteers? Yes, that's correct. So the correct answer is C. The private organization develop the model codes that are adopted by states and the local government. Okay, so now let's finish our United States fire codes and let's move our focus to the Canada, where we find a system that effectively balance the national coordinations with the territorial implementation. So the National Research Council of Canada, we call it NRC, publish a number of national model codes that serve as the basis for regulation across the country. And the most important of these are the National Building Codes of Canada, NBC, which provide the minimum requirements for health, life safety, and the structural sufficiency in new buildings. And the other one is NFC, which provides the minimum fire safety requirements for buildings, structures, and the area where the hazardous material are used, ensuring an acceptable level of the fire protection and the prevention during a building's ongoing operations. So it is vital to understand that these national codes are model documents only. They do not have the legal force in themselves. So they must be formally adopted by an authority having jurisdiction, which is typically a kind of provincial territorial government in order to come into effect as a law. So this adoption process varies. Sometimes the national model codes are adopted unchanged as the direct regulation of a province or the territory. In the other case, they are altered to suit the specific local needs, such as the geographical conditions or political priorities. So this allows for the national consistency while permitting the necessary regional adaptations. So that is the key features of the Canadian federal system. So the building code in Canada are broadly concerned with three key objectives, that is the fire safety, structural sufficiency, and the health. So they apply primarily to the construction of the new buildings and to relocation of the existing ones. So they are also come into play when there is a significant change in a building's use or when it undergoes substantial alteration. Generally, the scope of the building's codes in Canada is restricted to matters of the health, safety, and accessibility. However, when we reflect growing environmental concern, some provincial building codes have also begun to address energy conservation, integrating the sustainability into the core of the building regulations. So the fire codes in Canada generally apply to buildings that are already in use, regulating the day-to-day activities that can cause fire hazard. So they impose ongoing duties, such as the requirement to properly maintain the fire safety equipment and the egress facilities, and they control the combustibility of furnishings and decorations. And they also provide for the safe use, storage, and the handling of the combustible material and the dangerous goods in both new and existing buildings. So a critical requirement is the development and the implementation of a fire safety plan in anticipation of emergency. So the aim of the fire codes is twofold: to reduce the likelihood of the fire starting and to limit the damage and the community impact if the fire does occur. So the Canadian Commission on Building and Fire Codes, we call it CCBFC, is now the central body responsible for preparing and maintaining both the NBC and the NFC, which are published by NRC. So CCFBC produce these recommended model codes for adoption by the appropriate authorities. So the Institute, so the Institute for Research in Construction within the NRC provide the essential technical support for the CCBFC. So these surveys are coordinated by the Canadian Codes Center, which also acts as the vital communication link between the communities and the specialized researchers and provide the information to code user on scope and the application. So the national mode codes documents are developed and maintained using a broad-based consensual process. As we learned before, in the United States system, we also develop the standards and the codes based on the consensus. And in Canada, we also use the broad-based consensual process. So this philosophy ensures that the individuals from all segments of the construction industry, from the regulators and the firefighters, and also engineers and the building owners, have a meaningful opportunity to influence the change of the codes. So this can be done directly through the membership on the committee or indirectly by submitting the formal suggestion or proposal to and also commenting on the proposed change during the public review process. So this inclusive approach is designed to ensure that the final codes are practically effectively and can supported by those who must use them. So the work of the CCFBC is aid to by a series of standing committees, and each responsible for the specific technical area within the code. So this area expertise reflects the comprehensive nature of the documents, and this area includes the fire safety, building service, house and small buildings, hazardous materials, and some other energy conservations. So this committee structure ensures that each technical area receive the dedicated and expert attention during the code development and the revision process. So the standard committees do not work alone. They rely on more topic groups and the task groups for the focus advice on area of the special interest within the committee jurisdiction. So on the one hand, we have the topic groups. The topic groups are ongoing and addressing the persistence area of needs, while the task groups are formed with the short-term specific objectives to solve a particularly problems. So the expertise from the outside the standing committee is active for both type of the groups. The members of all these committees and groups are drawn from all segments of the construction industry, ensuring a balance of the perspective, and in total over 200 volunteers work on these kind of 25 committees. Okay, so now let's come to our questions. How does the CCFBC develop and maintain the national model codes? Through a closed process involving only government officials, or by adopting American standard without modification, or use a broad-based consensus process with industry participation, through direct voting by the general public. So it's very easy, right? Using a broad-based consensus process with the industry participation. The participation will from all segments of the construction industry. So that is the key point of the CCBFC. Okay, so the standing committee maintain an open door policy for suggestions from any resource, whether from an industry professionals, researchers, or a member of the public. However, for a suggestion to be seriously considered, it must be supported by valid technical argument and data. So the committees are explicitly directed to be influenced by sound science and engineering principles, and are unlikely to be influenced by some kind of non-technical arguments related to commercial consideration. So this ensures the code development process remains objectives and focus on its core mission of the fire safety. And a critical component of the Canadian process is the mandatory public review cycle. During every 5 years, the code development cycle, all technique changes agreed upon by the standing committee are circulated for a 3-month period of public review and comments. So this allowed for direct feedback from those who are most affected by a proposed change, that is, the users of the codes. So it significantly increased the range of the expertise applied to any subject, often uncovering practically implication or alternative viewpoints that the committee may not have considered. So each and every comment received is formally reviewed and addressed by the appropriate technical committee before a change is finalized. So a major strategy direction of the CCBFC outlined in its 1995 strategy plan was to make the national code document clear and easier to use by converting them to an objective-based format. So we know that some kind of prescriptive codes or standards, they provide some very high level aims, but they are not objective based format. So to realize these transitions, a task group on planning for objective based codes was formed. And this followed by a task group on implementation of the objective-based codes, which had a broad membership and reported jointly to the Commission and to the provincial committees. So this represented a significant philosophy movement towards making the intent of the code as important as the prescribed solutions. Okay, and here is the limitation of the current prescriptive requirements is that they typically involved at a time when some alternatives that are now available does not exist. So at that time, we need to propose some performance-based standard on code because in the modern buildings we may have some innovative design for our buildings and they are not available for the time that the current prescriptive requirements is developed. So the present codes are good at indicating to users what they have to do to conform, but they are not so at indicating why they must to do it. Many newly developed products or designs that may achieve the same or even better results are not covered. So that is why we need some performance-based codes. But CCBFC has not fully adopted a pure performance-based approach because these two primary reasons. The first is not all code users, including many builders, inspectors, and designers, have the expertise to deal with the complexity of the performance requirement. They prefer the clarity and the certainty of the prescriptive rules. And the second one is the more fundamentally one. There is not enough scientific information available to develop full performance-based code for all building aspects. So for current prescriptive requirements, qualitative performance criteria cannot be defined with the sufficient confidence to base the compliance solely upon them. So the solution developed by the CCBFC was the innovative objective-based code. So they proposed another concept. We name it the objective-based code. So this concept served as a bridge between the prescriptive code and the performance-based system. And this concept is built on the 5 major points. You can take a look at this point after the class. Okay, so let's take a break for our this class, and in the next class we will talk about the file codes in the United Kingdom. Okay, now let's start our class. So in this class, we will have a discussion on the fire codes in the United Kingdom. So the first England building regulation to incorporate fire safety measures outside of London were developed as the model bylaws in the 1950s. Many local authorities adopt these bylaws, but as we know, they are not accepted throughout the UK. So leading to a very impressive inconsistency in this kind of fire codes. And a major step come into the 1965 with the development and the adoption of the national building regulations throughout the most of the UK by using the Central London initially written its own unique regulations. So at that time, these national regulations were purely prescriptive, similar in the nature to the model building codes that used in the United States. A reform occurred in the 1985 when the UK moved to a system of the building regulation based on functional requirements rather than detailed prescriptive rules. So these requirements, rather than detailed prescriptive rules, are outlined in the Part B, Fire Safety, of the Schedule 1 to the Building Regulation for England and Wales. So this high-level goal-oriented framework is supported by a set of non-mandatory guidelines entitled the Approved Documents. So the approved document B provides the practical guidance on how to meet the functional fire safety requirements of the regulation. So this movement gave designer much greater flexibility, focusing on the outcomes rather than mandating the specific means to achieve it. So, in addition to the approved documents, British standards provide further, more detailed guidance for the design of various building components and systems. So it is important to note that both the approved documents and the British standards are recommended guidelines. They are not the law. So authorities having jurisdiction in England and Wales generally recognize that full compliance with this recommendation is not always possible, especially in some complex and innovative buildings. So, a fire safety engineering approach can be used to develop and justify the in alternative ways of achieving the compliance with the intent of the functional requirements. So since 1992 edition, the approved documents have formally recognized and allowed the use of an alternative approach to fire safety design, solidifying the role of the fire engineering. So the British standard documents, particularly the PD 7974 series, provide the technical methodologies for applying fire safety engineering. As we has learned in our lecture 6, the PD 7974 has much of the PDs, that is the documents for our different area of the fire safety. So another key features of the UK system is the option for the building design approvals. Some local government traditionally administer building approvals, and the approvals can also be obtained from the private sector, that is, the approval inspectors. So if the accepted by the local authorities, the approval inspectors can provide their own approvals. So these inspectors are evaluated for the technical competence and must be commercially independent for any of the building project, which introduce an element of the competition and the choice into the regulation process. So in the United Kingdom's building regulation system, what's the primary purpose of the approval documents? I think it is another very simple question. Which one would you think is the correct answer? To serve as the legally binding requirements that must be allowed exactly, or to provide official guidance on how to meet the functional requirements of the regulation, and to replace the need of the fire risk assessment, or to outline international standards that override UK building regulations. So the answer is B, to provide official guidance on how to meet the functional requirements of the regulations. So it is the approved documents, and specifically the PD 7974 provide the practical guidance on meeting the functional requirements outlined in the building regulations. They are not the legally binding requirements and the alternative approach. Okay, so the Fire Precaution Workplace Regulation 1997 and their uh, amendment were a significant piece of the legislation that applied to a much wider range of the workplace than any previous laws. So their scope was extensive and covering not only traditional office and the factors, but also some unique workplace. So you can take a look at this kind of fire precaution regulations. And these regulations contain several key provisions. The Regulation 4 required that the workplace be equipped with appropriate firefighting equipment and the fire detectors. The Regulation 5 is dealt with some emergency escape rules, requiring that their numbers, distributions, and the dimensions be adequate for the number of people present. And also, we have Regulation 6, which imposes the vital duty regarding the maintenance and plannings. A critical aspect was the specifics of what was adequate. Was this kind of largely determined by the findings of the mandatory fire risk assessment, and which is moved away from the one size fits all, but a kind of the risk-based approach. So the cornerstone of the entire regulation framework was the Regulation 8, that is placed an explicit duty on the employers to carry out a suitable and efficient assessment of the risk to the health and the safety of their employees. The fire risk assessment was the foundational process that informed all other fire safety measures, from the number of the extinguishers to the width of the axis. So this emphasizes the principle that the person creating the risk is best placed to manage it, which is a philosophy that would later be expanded and reinforced. So for our building designer, approved document B translates the high-level functional requirements of the building regulation into several specific design goals. So these include a wide range of aspects, as you can see from this slide. So to navigate this system, the Department of the Environment, Home Office, and the Welsh Office jointly publish a building regulation and fire safety. So this document served as a procedural guide for all fire safety issues concerning the building and the building work, helping the designers and the builders to understand their roles and the responsibility within the legal framework. So it complements the technical guidance of the approved document B by explaining the process of achieving the compliance. So a big change in English and Welsh come with the Regulatory Reform Order, commonly known as the RRO. So this order was designed to consolidate and simplify previous fire safety legislation, providing a minimum fire safety standard for all non-domestic places. So it covers place used for an employer's undertaking and made available to employees as a place of work or used in connection with the trade and the business. So it designates a responsible person, that is RP, who is the employers if a workplace or anybody having control of the premises to some extent, placing the legal duty on their shoulder. So these guidance documents are practically and targeted. For example, there is a specific guide for office and shops, another for the factories and the warehouse, and a detailed guide for the sleeping accommodation, which covers hotels, guest house, and the common area of the flats. So these guides help the responsible person who may not be a fire safety expert to understand the typical hazard in their type of the premises and the kind of control measures that are likely to be needed to comply with the law. So the fire safety order is a comprehensive legal document. Please note this is a kind of legal document. So let's take a look at this structure. So the part one covers the general provisions, including the crucial definition of the responsible person and the meaning of the general fire precaution and the meaning of the application to premises. So this part set the stage and defines the scope, let the key players involved. And for the part two, outlines the fire safety duties. These are the specific legal obligations for the responsible person. So it is a very important aspect, including the duty to take general fire precautions and to conduct a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment. The duties in Part 2 extend further to ensure a comprehensive approach. And the Part 3 of the order deal with the enforcement. So it details how the order is to be enforced and sets out the significant power of the inspectors. So it also allowed the fire officers to exercise those power on behalf of the inspector. Critically, it provides for the insurance of the formal notice, including the alteration notice for some high-risk premises, and the informant's notice to the required action, and the prohibition notice to restrict the use of the premises in case of the serious risk. And this part 4 covers offense and appeals, establishing the legal consequence of non-compliance. And the part 5 contains a range of the important miscellaneous provisions. So it defines the civil liability for the breach of the statute duty and the duty not to charge employers and the duty to consult employers. So this is another contents of the order. So beyond the primary legislation, other guidance documents exist in the United Kingdom. So the British standards, as we said before, published by BSI, are of significant importance. The key examples include the BS 476, which detail the fire test on the building material and the structures, and also the BS 5306, which cover the fire extinguishing installation and the equipment on premises, with the part 2 specifically on the sprinkler system, and also the BS 5839, the design, installation, and the maintenance of the fire detection and the alarm system buildings. So these standards provide the technical details that brings the functional requirements of the building regulation to the life. So, as a member of the European Union at that time, the UK has heavily relied on the standard developed by the European Committee for the Standardization in the Brussels. So these European standards were often adopted as British standards. So the key fire-related CEN publications include the EN 545, that is for the heat detector, and the EN 5410, that is for the flame detector, and also EN 1363, which sets out the general requirements for the fire-resistant test. So this illustrates that the multi-layered nature of the standardization, where the national standards exist within a broader international framework. Okay, so now let's look at the fire code in Australia. So Australia is a federation divided into 6 states and 2 territories. So in the early part of the 20th centuries, these states and the territories had independent adopted their own building regulations as they saw fitted, and leading to a lack of the uniformity. So a major push began during the 1960s when the various states and the terrorist governments, the federal governments, and the other related organizations jointly formed the Interstate Standard Committee on Uniform Building Regulation. So this body produced the first national model for technical building regulations, known as the Australia Model Uniform Building Codes, AMUBC, so which become the basis of the state and the territory technical regulations in the early 1970s. So in the 1980s, the Australian Uniform Building Regulation Coordination Council was formed to continue this work. So this organization developed the first edition of the prescriptive building codes of Australia, and which was a landmark achievement, as it was adopted nationwide in 1992. And 2 years later, this organization was replaced by another organization, that is the Australian Building Codes Board, to maintain and develop the BCA. So this moment come in the 1996 when the ABCB published a performance-based version. That is a big step from the prescriptive version to the performance-based version of the BCA, which has now been adopted nationwide. And additionally, the Australia Fire Safety Engineering Guidance were first published in 1996. In 1996, to provide a framework for applying fire engineering method. So the key features of the Australian system is the role of the Standards Australia, which are dedicated standards writing bodies. So these are private organizations similar in the nature to the NFPA in the United States. So they are responsible for developing the specific technical standards that are then incorporated by reference into the BCA or other relevant legislations. So the performance-based BCA is well structured. It provides the deemed to satisfy. The deemed to satisfy prescriptive provision offering a straightforward compliance path, and a building will be automatically deemed to satisfy the performance requirement of the BCA if it meets this prescriptive provision, providing a certainty and the clarity and the ease of the use. However, the BCA also fully embraced the innovation through an alternative solution. So the building designer may choose to propose an alternative solution to the authorities in order to obtain approval for a different method of design of the structure. And this requires demonstrating through engineering analysis that the alternative meet the performance requirement of the BCA. So traditionally, local government has been responsible for approving the building design in Australia. However, in recent years, legislation changes have enhanced the role of the approval private certifier in a building design and the approval process. Okay, now let's look at the fire code in Japan. So the Japan system of building code has traditionally been similar in structures to that used by the United States. So the cornerstone is the Building Standard Laws (BSL), a prescriptive code that has been enforced since 1950s. So it was originally based on the United States Uniform Building Codes, developed by the International Conference of the Building Officials. And a separate fire service law was also developed to govern the active fire protection system. So this code applied nationwide, providing a high degree of uniformity. Also, various cities and regions have historically been permitted to adopt the revision to the base codes to address their local condition, such as the seismic activity or some dense urban environment. So the BSL was amended in 1998 to include the performance-based requirement, and this reformed document was adopted in June of 2000. So this new code allows for 3 distinct alternatives for building design and approval. The first is the traditional path. The building design can meet the deemed to satisfy method. And the second allowed for a performance-based design approach based on the proven alternate method. And the third one, and it is the most flexible, allows the use of the detailed engineering analysis to prove that new non-proven alternative method or materials will meet the performance-based provision contained within that code. Okay, so finally, let's look at what is the fire code in Sweden. That is a nation with a long history of the fire safety regulations. So Sweden developed its first prescriptive rules for fire safety over a century ago. And following several fires that swept through densely populated urban areas. So this initial set of rules gradually evolved through several revisions of prescriptive building codes. And a major big step in 1994 with the introduction of the partially performance-based code known as BBR, published by the National Board of the Housing, Building and Planning. So Sweden supported its performance-based framework with 2 handbooks that provide the necessary engineering methods, tools, and accessible procedures for the fire engineering design and calculations. The English title of this handbook are Fire Safety Engineering Guidelines and the Guidelines on Fire Safety Design of HVAC System. So for most common building types, a standard prescriptive approach is still widely used and is fully acceptable. The code provides a set of deemed to satisfy design that are pre-approved as meeting the performance requirement of BBR. So this offers a simple and reliable compliance path for the conventional project. So the performance-based approach was in fact basically accepted in practice even before the formal introduction of BBR 94. This option is generally exercised when seeking an alternative method for a particularly system design rather than for a full building fire safety design. So a distinctive feature of the Swedish system is that there is no formal governmental inspection body that enforces building regulations for the general compliance. Instead, the primary legal responsibility for varying is the building owner in themselves. However, some individual systems, such as the alarms, the sprinklers, and the ventilation systems, must be inspected regularly by certified person and by the fire safety service. Okay, so that is to the end of the journey of our class. So in conclusion, our global tour has drawn upon the numerous sources from the Fundamental Safety Code Handbook to analysis of the code development worldwide. So this body of knowledge provides a comprehensive foundation for understanding the device, philosophies, and the mechanisms of the global fire safety legislation. And understanding this international prescriptive is necessary for the modern fire safety professionals, equipping you to work effectively across the border and to contribute meaningfully to the ongoing evolution of the fire safety management worldwide. Okay, so thank you for your engaged attention throughout our lesson. And any questions? Okay, no questions. Okay, thank you for your attending and see you next week.